and welcome to the Scotta Chronicast, the podcast which discusses all things relating to medieval Scotland. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Buchanan. This is episode 16, and I'm excited to be joined by Sally Pentecost. Welcome to the Scotta Chronicast.
Hello. Fantastic name of podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for joining me today. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation.
Me too.
Would you care to introduce yourself a little bit to the audience?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, I'm Sally Pentecost. I am Communications and Events Officer at Digit, which is a hub for Scottish archaeology, and we're a project that's coordinated by the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. Yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Cool. So how did you become interested in studying medieval Scotland?
So I feel like I kind of have a similar backstory to so many people who work and study in medieval Scottish history. It's going to start with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. You could have probably put money on that happening. And I feel so basic saying it because it's like everybody loves Lord of the Rings because it's amazing. But when I was a kid, that's what I was into. I got started really young with my uncle is a big sci-fi fantasy fan, and so I read the graphic novel of The Hobbit really young, and then growing up, I was into all of the medieval media. You know, the Robin Hood TV series, Tristan in Isolde, Princess Bride, which I still love.
Yes.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and dare I say it, Braveheart. Like, come on, everybody's seen Braveheart. It's had an impact on us all.
It has, yes.
And A Knight's Tale. Oh my God, A Knight's Tale.
Yes.
Like, who doesn't like that movie?
Yeah.
So all that had like a profound influence, I think, on me. And I also grew up in the northeast of England, so regular listeners to your podcast probably will recognize my accent because I have a similar sort of twang to Dr. Callum Watson. We're both from the northeast.
Right.
And I loved where I grew up. I grew up really rurally and sort of going around the ruins of medieval abbeys and farmsteads and stuff growing up. It was a real cool place to explore. And because I lived only about 20 minutes drive outside of Durham city, if you've never been, I would highly recommend you go. It's a gorgeous wee city. And I did my work experience at Durham Cathedral, which was pretty sweet. My sort of, is this a claim to fame? One of the things I did on work experience was I vacuumed Professor McGonagall's office.
Excellent.
I know, right? But like with not just like a normal like vacuum, like a Henry Hoover, like one of the dustbusters that you put on your back, like the Ghostbusters do. Just hoovering McGonagall's office. It was pretty sweet. But it was a fun work experience, and that building just has such a special place in my heart. And as I got older, and I moved to Scotland, and I went around a couple of the other abbeys and cathedrals up there. If you've ever been to Durham and Dunfermline, you'll know that there's like really similar stonework in there because it's the same stonemasons and I was like mind blown. And it's that sort of stuff that I love, when you can see these connections between people and places from hundreds and hundreds of years ago is what I love. But the thing that probably like from that work experience that really stayed with me, apart from the hoovering of McGonagall's office, was they were working on opening up the museum treasures in a new exhibition, which has since opened, and it's their permanent exhibition called Open Treasure, which I would highly recommend you go see if you're ever in Durham. And it's all of the rarest and most precious things in the cathedral collections. And the two things that I loved is, if you don't know, Durham is the resting place of Saint Cuthbert, who's an early medieval saint living and doing missionary work in the northeast of England in the early medieval period. And he's buried there. And the cathedral is essentially the shrine that built up around where he was buried. And they have some of the items that were found in his coffin.
Oh.
When it was opened like hundreds of years later, and that have since been cleaned and put on display. And they have his...
I like the emphasis on the fact that they'd been cleaned. That's...
Oh God, yeah. Like, yeah, absolutely. Like, cleaned and conserved.
Yeah.
And they have his pectoral cross.
Oh.
Which, because of the amazing work, conservation work that's been done on it, looks like it was made yesterday. And it had been...
Interesting.
Oh, it is so well preserved. And this thing is like going on 1,300 years old now.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And then the other thing that they've got is his portable altar. It's a very small, simple wooden object. So again, the fact that this has survived like over 1,300 years, and it's wooden, it's made of this organic material, is even more impressive. And the thing that I love about them, and everybody's kind of got their own connection to, everybody who loves history has got their own thing about history that they love and makes them passionate about it. And for me, it's the ability of these objects to completely transcend the passage of time, like, and bring us closer to the people who owned them, because, you know, obviously we only have the information we have on St. Cuthbert comes from very old documents. It was obviously a time before photography. We don't know what he looked like. And the fact that, you know, we have an object that sat on his skin, that was so close to his body for most of his life, and an object that he touched and that he carried with him and that he used in his daily life, and was clearly very important to him and precious with him because it was buried with him, just makes that person seem like a real person, a more well-rounded person, not just like an anonymous historical figure that kind of becomes a bit legendary the further back you go. These are the objects that belong to a human being, and that they thought were important and that wanted to be buried with them. And I love that about objects.
Yeah, it definitely makes them more tangible and like, oh, this is something that they physically interacted with and cared about, and you can see a little bit in their, you know, preferences. And
absolutely.
That's really cool. Yeah. That's fascinating. I will have to get back to Durham one of these days to see that. One of these days, whenever travel is...
When travel is allowed again, when it's safe to do so. And it will be, if we're patient.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So then you moved to Scotland, and then did you study medieval history or medieval Scottish history in particular?
I did. So I came from a family where none of my immediate family went to university. I had older cousins that went to uni, but my parents didn't, my grandparents didn't, my older brother didn't. But it's just something I always knew I would do. And I think it's probably just this sort of very romantic idea I had about university as a kid, being like, there's a place you can go and read all day, and like, that's fine. And other people do it too. And that's what you do. So there was never a time sort of growing up that I didn't think I would go to this magical place called university. And I ended up going to Edinburgh Uni, which is just stole my heart. It's a gorgeous
Mhm.
city, and I think I'd only visited it, even though it's not that far away from Durham. I'd only visited like once before, and just fell in love with the place. And I
Mhm.
started doing just a general history MA. I didn't specialize in Scottish history until I got about 2 years in.
Mhm.
But I did take modules specifically in medieval Scottish history that I just fell hard for. Like
Yeah.
the folk they had teaching on there, like Steve Boardman and Bill Aird,
Mhm.
just have such a knowledge of the subject that it's just kind of
Mhm.
wild. And what I loved about it as well was that something that Steve Boardman said in one of the very first lectures we had in medieval Scottish history was about Knight's Tale. And so my ears prick up thinking, oh, I've seen this
yes.
movie. And he said what he loved about it, because he's a historian of chivalry and pageantry and heraldry in particular,
Mhm.
was how, okay, we know they didn't dance to David Bowie, and they probably didn't do their hair in like the 90s knots and stuff like that. We know that's not
Right.
true, but it just evokes a feeling,
Mhm.
and that's why he loved it. When the crowd in the jousting arena start banging their fists and stamping their feet to Queen We Will Rock You, like obviously
Mhm.
that didn't happen, but it doesn't matter, because it just conveys the excitement that probably was happening when you're just about
Right.
to watch two guys speed headlong towards each other on horses with lances, like,
Yeah.
and about to get grievously injured.
Mhm.
The excitement of it, like being a wrestling match or a boxing match or something.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about it. It kind of really did a good job of chipping away the fear I had that studying history, especially in an academic setting, was going to be really kind of dusty,
Right.
like really like old school academic.
Mhm.
And it could be fun, and it could be exciting, and it could be relevant. And it's
Right.
about sharing stories that connect people then with people now. And that
Mhm.
if it's through the music of David Bowie, then I mean, all the better, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of,
Exactly.
we could just stop the podcast there. That's like my line. That's my that's my best line I'm gonna give. But
Yes.
yeah,
Bringing more people to Queen and David
I
Bowie.
know, right?
All. Yeah.
Yeah, why not? Like another thing from childhood that really got me into history, and I don't know if you had them over in the States or whether they were like an exclusively British thing, but the Horrible
Mhm.
History magazines.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, I've heard of them. Well, actually, we have a
yeah.
bunch on our shelf from my husband's collection,
Oh,
but
so
I haven't read them
good.
yet.
So good. They're and it's kind of taken off. Like I know that I have a young niece, and it was through her that I realized that there's now a Horrible Histories TV show, which
Mhm.
I would have killed for as a kid.
Yeah.
But we had the magazines, and I had um, this is like a great thing of pride for me, but it might be like a great embarrassment. I don't know, maybe to some people that are listening. I had a subscription to Horrible Histories magazine when I
Yeah.
was like 8. And they came with little cards that you would collect in a tin, and some of them were
Oh, nice.
holographic. Oh,
Mhm.
if you're a kid growing up in the late 90s or early 90s, anything holographic,
Right.
it's
Yep.
it's top tier. It's
It
god
is.
tier.
It's
Um,
that's the best.
that's the best, right? And I have this like slightly embarrassing story of when I used to read in the car a lot, because I could not stop reading, particularly these magazines. Even though I got quite car sick when I read, and I was on a long
Oh,
car journey with my parents.
yeah.
They repeatedly told me to stop reading in the back of the car. I wouldn't. I was like, just one more page, just one more page. The inevitable happened, and we had to stop the car. Um,
Yep.
and as my mum's like cleaning me up outside, and I'm just bawling, like tears streaming down my face, and she's like,
Oh.
it's okay, you know, it's never nice when this happens, but we'll go home, we'll get you cleaned up. And I'm like, no, it's not that. I ruined my magazine. And I was just so devastated. Because it was new. I just got it. I ruined, and quite aptly, it was the Vile Victorians edition, and I'd ruined it. I know, right? And I wasn't happy until my dad got me a replacement one the next day, and I could continue where I left off. Like, that's how into history I was at such a young age. But that's a big digression. I studied at Edinburgh from 2013 until 2017.
Right.
Did my MA, and I did my thesis on high medieval Northern England. You know, you can take the girl out of the Northeast, but you can't take the Northeast out of the girl. Right. And I did it on 2 12th century texts from Hexham Abbey, which is in Northumberland. And
cool.
There was a lot of Scottish history embedded in there. It was mostly about border relations between Scotland and England at the time of King David of Scotland and King Stephen of England, and and St Cuthbert makes an appearance, which is really cool. But I imagine you've probably had this this moment as an academic, as a historian, and studying for my undergrad thesis, I had the moment where you think you found something new, like something fresh, something nobody's ever noticed before, right? And I remember this moment so clearly when I was reading a secondary source, and the author had said, it was interpreting the primary text and being like, and then this happened, and she builds her argument around it, and I'm like, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
I've read the primary text. You go back, that's not in there. And if that's not in there, then that dismantles her entire argument. What?
Yeah.
and then you run to your supervisor's office, like holding it in the air, like, I think I found something. And they're like, oh yeah, I noticed that like 10 years ago. It's in a footnote in my paper.
Yeah.
Like there it is right there. I'm like, of course it is. Of course it is. Because I'm an undergrad, okay? Undergrads don't get those moments, but you think you do, and it's beautiful. And that's kind of like a rite of passage, I feel, for any historian. It's like when you think you found something new, and then somebody got there like a decade before you, and that's fine.
Yep, that is very common, I think. And you're just like, oh wow, yeah. It's important to make sure that you do thorough research to make sure you're not just arguing something that somebody else has done.
Oh yeah, that's part of the process. That's why you read all of your secondary literature.
And hopefully you don't get too far into doing it before you find out that somebody has.
Oh yeah, like somebody's done my exact dissertation.
Yep.
Oh no.
Yep. Cool. So did you do your master's at Edinburgh as well? I
didn't. I did my master's at St Andrews.
Okay.
So another fantastic Scottish uni. And I, like, confession time, I did my master's because I loved history. I still love history. But also, I didn't know what I was going to do.
Right.
And maybe some of your listeners have had this before, where you're like, okay, I've known what I wanted to do since I was a kid. All I've ever wanted to do was go to university. And then about 3 years into my undergraduate degree, I was like, oh crap, I got there. I did this. I did the one thing the only thing I've ever wanted to do, and it's coming to an end. And there is life after it. What am I going to do with it? And I started thinking about, oh well, could I be a teacher? No, I have no patience. Could I be a lawyer? No, I'm terrible at public speaking. Are there any careers in history? Let's find out. But let's stay in the warm, safe embrace of academia for another year.
Yeah.
Let's do that. And that is not a wrong way to do it.
No.
If you love what you do, and you can feasibly go on and do it for another year, by all means, like, why wouldn't you?
Right.
It's So I moved to St Andrews in 2017, and it was for a master's degree. So it was just for a year, taught masters, and it flew by.
Yeah,
it really flew by. And again, another amazing place to study medieval Scottish history, right? Have you been to St Andrews?
Yes, I have.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It
is. It's amazing. It is tiny. Like, don't get me wrong. It's tiny. There are like 3 streets, and that's St Andrews. And it's beautiful. And the course I was on was kind of like a stepping stone onto a PhD, if you like. And I didn't know whether or not I wanted to do a PhD at the time. But I thought I'll do this master's for a year and see how I get on. And I did I sort of went even deeper into the medieval Scottish history for my master's dissertation, which was on the rulers of Fife in particular. The dissertation title was Comes or Morme. I have butchered both the Latin and the Gaelic there. Comes, I think, just meaning earl, and Morme kind of meaning the same thing. Or does it? That is the question. It's like, it was looking at the 11th to the 13th century in Scotland at a time when it's not that the records are sparse, but they don't show a clear narrative between what was the lay of the land pre-feudalization and Norman influence and post it. So it was looking at, it took Fife as a case study, which I thought was great because it was where I was living at the time. And it was looking at a lot of different type of sources, records, to try and find out what the nature of power was. What are the power relations that are happening in medieval Fife, and what are the sort of pre-existing native, or might say Gaelic, rules of law, and how does that change into the earls that we get later on from the 13th century onwards. And again, it was a great wee case study to do Fife, because in the records that I was looking at, where it was referencing like grants of land from powerful magnates to the church, and these were villages that exist now. These were churches that are still standing, or that descendants of them are. And it was just a fantastic place to be at the time. And I had my sort of first encounter with paleography. And I was not prepared. I was not prepared. It's fantastic, but like when you get something that's I think this tends to be more like later sort of early modern handwriting, but it's just all loops. It's all loops. Like is that a word? But yeah, being around and St Andrews University is super lucky in that it has some, or rather I should say the students are really lucky, because the university has some fantastic original manuscripts that you can look at and study with. And that's what I did. Like it felt like I'd arrived kind of as a historian, where I was like looking at these original texts, and then I was writing a thesis about them, and I was like, okay, I do history now. Like that's what I do. But it's also the time when I started a blog, because I thought, okay, I'm kind of in this position where I am in academia, and so I'm sort of engrossed in that world. I go to like conferences and reading groups, and I go to presentations from my peers and see what PhD students are writing about and stuff. Is there a way that I can translate this, what I'm doing now, to a more accessible, easily digestible format? Can I tweet about it, basically? Can I get it into 480 characters? And so I started a blog called Her Medieval Scotland, which has since been archived, but I have dreams of when more hours are added to the day, I will resurrect Her Medieval Scotland.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I wrote about just what I was interested in at the time and what I was learning about at the time. So I wrote about Margaret Tudor, and I wrote about the dissertation I was doing, the Rulers of Fife, and I wrote about different historical interpretations of Mary, Queen of Scots, because there have been many.
Yes.
And there have been many since that time. I could update that blog post if I resurrected the blog.
Yes.
And that's what I was doing when I kind of got to the end of my my degree, my master's, and started to think, okay, what am I going to do now? And at the time, I'd done a little bit of work experience for Dig It, sort of on a one-off basis. I'd helped them out on World Heritage Day when they were doing some projects around the old and new towns in Edinburgh. So I knew them a little bit, and they knew about the blog, and I said I wanted to learn more about social media. I thought, okay, if I'm gonna do this, if I'm gonna get some kind of job out of writing history for a living on social media, I need to know a bit more about communications and stuff like that.
Right.
So I started doing some work experience with Dig It when I was embedding their YouTube videos. They have a YouTube channel called Dig It TV, which is awesome.
Yeah.
If you
it is amazing.
haven't checked it out, I would recommend. It's really cool. We have some awesome presenters as well. Saga Crawford and David Weinzock, who just make history exciting.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. It's super great.
They're super great. And so I was helping them, doing some work embedding their YouTube videos onto the website, and at the same time was learning more about communications. So it just kind of, by the time I got to my master's, everything sort of happened all at once, where I was looking for jobs whilst also trying to finish my dissertation, and then Dig It called and said, our comms person's going on secondment for 9 months. Would you like a job for 9 months? And I may have screamed at the time. And it was absolutely a dream come true. But also I hadn't finished writing my dissertation yet. So, you know, these things never happen neatly. No. So for the last 2 months of my master's degree, I was doing a full-time job, living in another town whilst finishing my dissertation. So that was a time.
Yes. I can imagine that being slightly stressful.
Slightly stressful. But I think the funniest thing about it was that we sort of had a catch-up meeting about progression from my master's with the head of the course, and the vast majority of my colleagues on the course went on to do PhDs, because that's kind of what the course was designed for.
Right.
And so he says to me, so have you got your PhD place sorted? And I said, oh no, I'm not doing that. I'm going on to do, I got a job. And he was like, a job? Doing what? I said, in history. And then I explained, and he was like, wow, I didn't know there were jobs like in history that weren't curatorial or teaching.
Right.
I know nothing about that. Good luck. I was like, thanks. That's cool.
Great.
And yeah. And so I moved back to Edinburgh, where I still am, a couple of years later, and started work for Dig It.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's sounds like a super exciting, although the transition might have been a little interesting, chaotic. But yeah, super exciting to have that opportunity right away.
A little chaotic, yeah. Oh yeah, I was super duper lucky, and I do still count myself lucky every day to work at Dig It.
Yeah.
So if you don't know Dig It, I would super recommend you go check them out. For one. There's my little plug for the episode. We are a hub for Scottish archaeology, which means that we have a website and a social media presence and a YouTube channel, and we share Scotland's archaeological stories on all of those platforms. And we do that through a bunch of different things. We do them through what we call Discover articles, which are like bite-size. This is why I love doing it, because it was kind of what I was doing with my blog before. They're bite-size, easily digestible articles about all manner of things about Scottish archaeology. We're super lucky that Dr. Callum Watson, who's been on your podcast, has written one for us about the archaeology of Robert the Bruce.
Oh, excellent.
And as you and I both know, what Callum doesn't know about Robert the Bruce is not worth knowing. So
there's nothing.
It's a great article.
There is nothing that Callum doesn't know.
There is nothing he doesn't know. Waiting for the day when Callum goes on Mastermind and just sort of like something happens, like fireworks go off, because there is just not a question he can't answer. And we promote events run by loads of different fantastic organizations, mostly like community archaeology groups or universities that do open lectures. All of them are free or low cost and open to all. And the whole aim of the project really is to just get people excited about Scottish heritage and Scottish stories, and kind of as well to dispel a bit of a myth that you have to be quote unquote Scottish to enjoy Scottish history, or to feel like it's your own, right?
Right.
And that's something I am super passionate about, particularly with some projects that we're running right now. And my colleague Julianne McGraw led on a project last year during our summer campaign, which is called Scotland Digs, unsurprisingly. And it's our summer campaign is to because again, unsurprisingly, the summer season is the busiest season for archaeologists because it's light most of the time and the ground is not hard. So we tend to get most of our work done in the summer. And because everything shut down in 2020 because of COVID, digs didn't happen. Some commercial digs still kept running, but none of the community archaeology projects that would normally be running, like up at the Nessa Broker in Orkney, everything just came to a standstill. And so it was amazing how people in the Scottish history and archaeology sector pulled through and still adapted to put most of their schedule online. So we couldn't dig, but we could still tell people about what we were doing. We could still share the results of findings that we had last year and what's been going on since. And depending what happens with COVID, we might do that again this summer. But one thing that Julianne thought would be a good idea and turned out to be a great project was, instead of using our marketing budget on like Facebook ads or anything like that, was to commission 3 Scotland-based digital artists to recreate a scene from Scottish history based on or inspired by 3 sites or artifacts that had been found in the last year. Right. And you can see the results on our website, and they're all really different mediums of art and different sites and artifacts. And the thing that we try and do with our projects, we've got a similar one coming up this year, which depending on when this podcast comes out, might have already come out. It's ahead of the Stanza International Poetry Festival in March, where we're commissioning a Scotland-based poet to write a poem inspired by a particular site or artifact in Scottish archaeology. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's to try and engage audiences in new ways, do things that are a little bit out of the box. But the other thing is like recognizing that there are groups of people, particularly disabled folk, people from ethnic and cultural backgrounds that are different to your average white Scottish background, queer folks as well, who have traditionally been excluded from recreations and interpretations of the past, and trying to get different perspectives on Scottish history that is not your crusty old white dude. Yeah. Because it's been done. Yes. I think we can agree. It's very much been done.
It has. Yeah.
And you see things differently through other people's eyes, right?
Oh, yeah. It's definitely, and I certainly think having the perspective, like the outside looking in, does bring to light a whole lot of what sometimes seems so obvious and yet people have just ignored or not noticed before, themes and details about history.
And the archaeology and history has this too, kind of suffers from a hangover of something we used to do a lot in the sort of 18th and 19th centuries, of assuming things about past societies based on what our own looks like now.
Right.
So, for instance, we commissioned an article last year from a fantastic museum expert and queer activist called Sasha Coward, who wrote an article for us called "Queering Archaeology: The Vikings in Scotland," and it's about a couple of case studies in Scotland about how we've assumed things about Norse society and about the Vikings because of interpretations that were made about them like 100 years ago,
right,
or 150 years ago. And there's a particular burial in Scotland that's referenced in this article where it's a joint burial. It's two people side by side. And obviously at the time when it was found in the 19th century. We didn't have the kind of analysis available that we do now then. So we weren't able to tell the biological sex of the bones. What they determined was that one was female and one was male based on the grave goods that are buried with them.
Right.
So one has a sword and an axe and some like forging tools like tongs and things. And the other has jewelry, needles, that kind of thing. And they assume, okay, they're probably a couple, one is the wife, one is the husband. And it's like, yeah, we don't know that.
Yeah.
We don't know that. And it's trying to like retrain your brain to break away from those assumptions that we have about societies that are so far removed from our own, and that we need to kind of like build up from that. And there are fantastic historians now that are doing work on particularly Norse and Viking society, and kind of rewriting the script, if you like.
Yeah, super exciting. I love the idea of incorporating more artistic interactions with these historical artifacts as well as a way of engaging the public. I think that's really awesome. Yeah, it sounds like this is just some super, super exciting work that's going on, and people should check out what you guys are doing. So where's the best way for people to find all of this stuff?
Digit is on Twitter and Instagram at Digit Scotland. We're most active on Twitter. You can also find us on Facebook at Digit Scotland. And if you just Google Digit Scotland, you'll find our website. And we share news about archaeology news stories that have popped up recently. We also share either free or low cost events on Scottish history and archaeology that are open to everybody. And obviously they're all online at the minute. But that's cool because that makes them even more accessible.
Exactly.
And we also regularly update our blog. We call them Discover Articles, usually once a week, with a new article written by an expert on some aspect of Scottish archaeology. So it might be queer Vikings, it might be Robert the Bruce, it might be, we've got a couple of series going on at the minute, one called Destination Archaeology, where we focus in on a particular location in Scotland and give you like the top highlights to make sure you see when it's safe to travel again.
Right. Yes.
And also Decoding Archaeology, where we take a phrase or term or concept that is often used in writing up about archaeology news stories that folk might not know what it means. Things like isotope analysis or DNA analysis or ground penetrating radar. Like, what do these things mean?
Right.
And we ask somebody who does this, who knows what it's about, to explain through a case study in Scottish archaeology.
Right.
So you know exactly what's going on. It's trying to demystify archaeology and think, yeah, this is something that everybody can get interested in.
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about how you came to medieval Scotland and how you came to this awesome job at Digit.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting. absolutely honoured to be among the ranks of the fab and fantastic people you've had on this podcast so far.
The Scotta Chronicast is just one of many things relating to medieval history on medievalists.net. If you like what you see and what you hear, consider being a patron on patreon.com/medievalists. Thank you for joining us on the Scotta Chronicast. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also follow our account on Twitter @Scotta Chronicast. Our music is Ex te Lux Oratur by Gaita. Thanks for listening.